Hey everyone, last time we were taking a look at Rococo art, some of the major principles and how there was a divide, particularly within France, between the Rubenists and the Poussinnists as they were trying to establish this new emerging style. The first kind of generation went with Rubens. And then the second one was more motivated by Poussin and his style. We're going to take a look at that with neoclassical art. There's kind of Rococo. I think of Rococo and neoclassical art are as different sides of the same coin, right? Responding to their day and age, but responding to it differently, right? Some of the major characteristics, and again, as I mentioned in the last lecture, I don't really like to go over like major criteria that gives you kind of a short version to think about art. Because I just like you guys to experience the art, to start thinking about it and start forming your own thoughts of, stylistically, what is this era about, right? Rather than giving you some type of shortened, abbreviated version of it. But since we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on Rococo or neoclassical art, we'll just do one lecture on each of them before we get into Romanticism. I'll give you kind of a shortened version because we're not going to be taking a look at as much art, right? Generally, neoclassical art is a response to the frivolous nature of Rococo art. So where Rococo art is not serious and just kind of loose and fun and, kind of less, there's less of a very sophisticated point to it. Neoclassical art is going to be much more serious, much more dramatic. And so that's going to be a very clear difference. And so as you guys enter a museum and you're thinking about, what era something comes from stylistically, you'll know right away whether something's Rococo or neoclassical based on how serious it is and how the colors and the lighting. If the colors and lighting are dramatic and intense, it's going to probably be neoclassical art. If it's very light and airy and pastels, it's going to predominantly be Rococo. And so you can start to try to date art as well. As you walk into a museum, you can start to think, okay, what century was that done in? Or within this one, we can start thinking about maybe what decade this particular work of art is. Even if you're not familiar with it, you can start placing art within a specific time frame just due to the socio-historical developments or just due to the art trends of the day. And so a lot of times I can go into a museum and I can start to identify, okay, I can roughly see this was in this kind of 20-year period or so, right? Give or take. And so just by looking at the different styles and the influences. And so hopefully as we go throughout the semester, you'll start to build up that kind of language, that kind of vocabulary, becoming much more culturally literate in the artworks around you. And then you can start thinking about how works of art start to influence you, right? Which ones are most influential? Which ones do you want to continue on in your own style, right? There's also going to be, in terms of neoclassical art, there's going to be a linearity, which means it's going to focus more on the kind of the vertical and the horizontal, going to be very linear in terms of, very similar to what we see with Poussin, right? Very structured, very orderly in that sense. There's going to be a tighter brushstroke rather than the looser brushstroke that we would see with a Rubens or with Rococo, particularly with Fragonard and the swing or the meeting. These are going to be much tighter brushstroke. It's going to be very clean, very pristine in terms of how the artist is representing these images to focus on clarity, right? There's going to be much more dramatic lighting, not necessarily as intense as Baroque art, but there's going to be more dramatic lighting to underscore the serious content that they're representing, right? There's going to be more sculptural forms where the forms are going to look more like sculptures than like figures that are in motion. There's going to rely on classical architecture, figures, dresses, and themes for its inspiration. So you're going to see much more about classicism. Very similar to what we saw with the Renaissance, but this is going to be a different application of Roman and Greek ideas, right? Mainly what we see happening, just to give you some context about neoclassical art and where it comes from, Herculaneum and Pompeii are two ancient sites that were lost due to a volcanic eruption. And some archaeologists stumbled upon them in Italy in the 1750s. And so right around the 1750s, you have this new interest in these old ideas. And so people are uncovering for the first time this civilization that was completely eradicated almost overnight. And so we start to see their pans, they start to see their pottery, we start to see their homes, and it's just kind of, it's like it was a moment frozen in time, and so it gives us a window into this ancient world. And so people become more fascinated by these ancient ideas. And so again, you see a re-emergence of classical ideas, very similar to what we see with all of the influx of Greco-Roman ideas with the fall of Constantinople during the 15th century and influencing Renaissance art. We see a similar kind of re-emergence with that, with the discovery of Pompeii and Herculaneum. There's going to have more serious moralistic themes, subjects, rather than kind of the light frivolousness of just kind of sneakily getting away with things. There's going to be strong heroic figures. There's going to be more about the Enlightenment philosophy, when Enlightenment philosophy is going to focus on the ideas of what is the best way for the most amount of people to attain happiness, right? If only 10% of the people are living in luxury and leisure, is that the happiest kind of society for people to be in? Maybe there's a way to have more equity, to live in a more equitable way. Maybe people need a greater voice. And so Enlightenment philosophy is going to mainly center on political ideas, political objectives that are then going to lead to the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And there's going to be much more emphasis on nationalism expressed through patriotism, the idea of dying for one's country, right? So that's going to be a predominant idea. What we see here with Jacques-Louis David's image that you see on the screen, this one is the death of Socrates, and it demonstrates some of the major principles of neoclassicism. Number one, it has the focus on that linear plane, right? The horizontal and the verticals, right? The vertical of Socrates here, the horizontal of the bed, the vertical of Plato, his student, and then the vertical of his torso, and then the horizontal of his legs. Sorry, I don't know what just happened. That was weird. And the other element of this is kind of the more brighter, vibrant colors rather than the pastels. It's going to be much more kind of dramatic colors, similar to what we see with the kind of use of very vibrant colors within Poussin's work, but then everything else is kind of muted. We see that style represented here. And then the strong moralizing themes. This is a political theme. This is the moment when Socrates takes the hemlock from one of his students and drinks it. The hemlock is a poison, and so this is where he's going to poison himself. And Socrates was put on trial for corrupting the youth and poisoning the minds of people, speaking against the state, and blasphemy, speaking against the gods. None of it was true, but Socrates was teaching people to think for themselves. And so that was thought to be a very dangerous thing, because the government doesn't want its citizens to think for itself. That would be problematic. And so they see him as a dangerous figure, and they want to put him to death. And so they put him on a sham trial, and they put up the kind of these trumped up charges, and then they condemn him to death. And so he says, rather than being executed, giving them the satisfaction of killing me, I'm going to kill myself. And so here he gathers around all of his students to give them one last instruction. And what he's doing here is he's pointing to the divine, right? That this world is not about this world. This world is about connecting with the gods, right? And so this is going to heavily influence Plato and Plato's ideas. And we've talked about that when we're covering Neoplatonism in the Renaissance, right? So he's taking a look at this, suggesting that the physical world is just this temporary state, but we need to focus on the divine, right? But his students are gathered around him. They're all kind of crying out in pain and agony at the loss of their teacher. One has his hand on his thigh, contemplating, right, trying to come to terms with this. This student can't bear to look. And then we have Socrates' wife ushered out of the room before he drinks it, before he dies. And then she just kind of turns to wave goodbye to her husband. Very different from the themes that we would see with Rococo, where it's just about blowing bubbles or just about reading in a library or something of that nature. We see this is about one sacrificing himself for a larger cause, right? The larger cause of freedom of thought, the larger cause of being able to to speak out and to have critical thinking, right? Similar ideas that we see here. This is the Oath of the Haredi. We see this one's this one's by the same artist, Jacques-Louis David. He's going to be one of the major artists of the 18th century. This one demonstrates the similar ideas of going back to ancient Rome as a means of inspiration. We see the influence of the Roman architecture in the background. The colors are vibrant in terms of the clothing, but then the surroundings are much more muted. And then we see this kind of balanced composition, right, with the three figures on the one side, and then the three, well, I guess there's kind of five with the two young children, three main figures of the women on the foreground, right, or on the right-hand side. And so the three men juxtapose the three women. The three men are kind of standing erect and ready to go and vibrant and alive, and the women are kind of defeated and deflated, and they're just kind of sad. But the moment that's being represented here is Horus is the emperor of Rome. He has a conflict with a neighboring town of Cumene. And what the two leaders of the two city-states decide to do is they decide to send their sons to battle, and the winner will take all, right? So whoever wins will win the agreement or the disagreement between the two states. So what we see here is this is the sons of Horus, known as the Horedi, that are pledging their allegiance to Horus the emperor, him having the swords and kind of, accepting their pledge and then crying out kind of as this kind of plea to watch over them, but also in this kind of acceptance, raising his hands to accept their willingness to die for the state. And so this has a very clear political message. The message here is there are things worth dying for, right? The ideas of freedom, the ideas of protecting your state, the ideas of protecting your family, your country, right? This is all embedded within this, and very different from the very light, frivolous themes of the Rococo era. And then on the right-hand side, you see this is the mother of the Horedi. And then I'm not sure that I think the book outlines who is who. One of them is a sister of the Horedi, and then married to one of the Cumeni, and one of them is a sister of the Cumeni and married to one of the Horedi. And so either way, they know that they're going to lose either their husband or their brother. And so this side of the canvas demonstrates the sacrifice of what they're actually willing to sacrifice for. So the idea of loss. If we didn't have this in here, this would, they humanize the particular work and their sacrifice for it. But what we see here with the death of Socrates and the Oath of the Haredi is that they're heavily inspired by Poussin and the death of Germanicus, where Germanicus was poisoned by the emperor, his stepfather, and he gathers around all of his, friends to avenge him. And then his wife kind of crumples, right? Showing the idea, to humanize him, the idea of that loss, heavily influenced by these ideas. And we see David inspired by them, knowing of this kind of motif, and he re-engages, or he kind of represents that, continues on with that theme. Taking a look at West and the death of General Wolfe, we see similar ideas again with neoclassical art. And it's not to say that all neoclassical art deals with death. I mean, the first three kind of would suggest that, but they don't all deal with death. But a lot of them deal with this idea of sacrifice. And so these three demonstrate those kind of political ideals that are at the core of neoclassical art, right? This depicts the Battle of Quebec, where there was a war between the French colonies and England, and the British Army and the French battled for 15 minutes. It wasn't a long battle, but in the process, General Wolfe was mortally wounded. He was shot several times and he was wounded, and here he's on the battlefield, kind of looking up to heaven, or looking up maybe to his comrades that surround him, kind of giving them his last words of advice, very similar to what we see with the death of Socrates. But the idea here is that in death, he gains fame as a national hero. So it has that very clear political message to it, right? So I think both Rococo and Neoclassical art have political messages to them. Rococo is suggesting we have life and we have luxury and leisure because we are important, because we're part of the ruling family, so don't question us. And Neoclassical art has a different kind of political message. There are ideals that are worth sacrificing for. There are principles worth sacrificing for, right? Freedom, love of country, duty, obligation, these are all worth dying for, right? So similar ideas that we see. And this is just a couple others that I just wanted to show you. Reynolds, Lady Sarah Branbury sacrificing to the Graces. And so this is the idea of going to these Greek goddesses, sacrificing the coin in her hand so that she could be filled with the same type of grace and beauty and poise that the Graces had. And so this is the kind of connection to the to antiquity. Not as serious as the death of Socrates or the oath of Heracles or the General Wolfe, but it's similar ideas in terms of placing it within the idea of Neoclassicism, right? This classical idea. And then this one, just to show you very quickly here, David, it's the intervention of the Sabine women. What happens with the Sabine women is Remus and Romulus. These are two individuals that found Rome. They go to Rome, and the problem is they don't have any women. And in order to found a major empire, right, and that's kind of their vision, this great country, you're going to need some offspring. And so what they do is they go to a neighboring town of Sabine, and they see some women that are bathing in a local lake, and they said, hey, we need women. There are women there. Why don't we just take them? Not a good idea. But that's according to legend. That's what they did. They kind of abducted these Sabine women. They took them back to Rome, and then the Sabine people are like, hey, people just ran off with their women. That's a problem. But in the meantime, the Sabine women fall in love with Remus and Romulus, and so this is the intervention. So this is the Sabine women coming to, with the men coming to their rescue. They're saying, no, but wait, we love them. So it's demonstrating some of those kind of ideas of stoicism, of bravery, of courage. The courage of Remus and Romulus to found a nation, even though it was done by horrifying means. And then the bravery and courage of the women to intervene and to try to save the destruction of a complete community, right? But similar ideas, right? So very different from what we see with Rococo, right? There's some political ideas, some overtones in both of them, but they have a very different approach. And what we're going to see, this is kind of foreshadowing. Rococo and Neoclassical art are going to lead to the French Revolution, right? Rococo art is going to demonstrate why the aristocracy needs to give up some of their power because they don't focus on anyone but themselves. Neoclassical art is going to demonstrate the inspiration of ideals that are worth fighting for, are worth dying for. The ideas of freedom, democracy, right? Change, political ideas. These are worth dying for. And so both of them are going to really inspire people to take charge and to make change happen, right? That's just a couple examples of how art can lead and direct society, can be inspirational, that it's not just something that hangs in a museum, but people can see it and they can learn from it and they can change them and fundamentally, on some occasions, change society, right? This one was done in 1799. The French Revolution starts in 1789, but it continues on. There's several waves of it. And so people keep coming back to these ideas as the different waves of the French Revolution happen. They keep coming back to these ideas, suggesting what are the main principles that we want to die for. Neoclassical art gives a voice to what those principles can be.